How's it going, guys? It's illumignostic, popping on for a quick but hopefully very powerful live stream. Um, I'm, I think, through the COVID pretty much all the way. Pretty happy about that. It was 18 days or so that I've more or less just lost all productivity, and I'm never happy about that. So good to be here, good to be breathing and have a little bit more energy. Um, and really what got me thinking about the subject that we're going to tackle tonight, and it's really more the way that I'm thinking about the subject, because I'm always thinking about this subject. Um, you know, there is, I think, very little disagreement that there's a lot of confusion and chaos and uncertainty in the world at the moment. And I think when you get into those kind of circumstances, uh, it's very easy for people that are well-intending to contribute to negative circumstances and to contribute to confusion. And people, it's very easy to convince people that they're taking the moral high ground, and maybe they're not. And it seems to me that once people are convinced that they're taking that moral high ground, it's very difficult to convince them otherwise. Um, it's it's a bit overwhelming, for sure. But I think the solution for all of us is to look inward with the intention of making the our own universe and our concern with our own universe and the shape that it takes um, to be our primary focus, and to really sort of disconnect ourselves from global concerns and cultural narratives that might be weighing us down. Because at the end of the day, really, you know, what we need to do is organize our internal world and become more effective at that, and uh, more sure in our course. You know, um, I I sort of have, there are a few things in the universe that I really accept as truth. And one of them, although I'm probably only like 90%, uh, is this idea that that consciousness, that in becoming conscious, the nothingness that preceded creation, that it was this moment, this rushing forth of the logos, the vibration of this one consciousness saying sort of Eheieh, which is I am that I am in ancient Hebrew. Um, and somehow through this moment of self-realization, order was imposed on the chaotic energies that made up the primordial stew of, the chaotic early universe. And, you know, we, being microcosms of that macrocosm, are replicating this process in our own micro universe, right? It is our own self awareness, our own consciousness. What we think we are is what we create, right? And there is a sort of balance, there are limitations, right? We cannot be anything that we fundamentally are not capable of becoming, right? So there are limitations um, that are sort of imposed on our process of becoming, and the extent to which we can influence the universe around us, for example. But taking all that into consideration and moving forward, we absolutely do define our experience and the universe that we exist in terms of our perception of ourselves, right? That's the fundamental force at work in this process of co-creation that we are engaged in with the universal mind. Right on, Micah. Yeah, I mean, you know, he's referencing the inbred murderers video that I made. You know, I'm not entirely sure that I'm sorry I went through that. I mean, I understand what you're saying, but you know, there's a part of me, I think, that is just grateful that I didn't have like a normal mundane upbringing. Um, and you know, that video was kind of focused. That last live stream was definitely focused on like the violence and the you know, the struggle of being sort of surrounded in that kind of chaos and ignorance. But you know, that's not all there was. There was definitely always this um, pursuit of the deep metaphysics that I think was sort of strengthened. My resolve to pursue that in a meaningful way was, if anything, you know, increased and strengthened by those experiences, because I very quickly understood that the antidote to the kind of behaviors that those people exhibited, that, you know, this gnosis, that this pursuit of meaning in the universe is what, you know, it's the antidote to that other type of consciousness that um, really fears, you know, the more holistic mind. You know, those people were all deeply religious. You know, they were all Christian. Um, and you know, I'm sure you guys have noticed that people that are coming from that place, they'll have a tendency to ridicule the seeking mind, the questioning mind. Um, you know, my bookworminess was a big part of the motivation for those people to, you know, attack me. Um, yeah, so like I was saying, I hear you and I appreciate it, but it's all part of the puzzle, you know. Um, it all serves its purpose, and whether that's a matter of fate or, you know, it's really irrelevant, because it comes to serve that purpose, you know. Uh, but we're getting a little bit um, off subject. Uh, have I heard about the Jews in England, Scotland, and Ireland? I don't know what you're talking about there. There are Jews everywhere in the world. I don't know if you're talking about, you know, historicity or something. But certainly the subject of this live stream and this idea that consciousness in a vibratory mode is what compelled chaos to order in the beginning, and to sort of draw us back onto topic, that is what we are trying to do in our own individual lives. And you know, the chaos that we are confronting globally gives us an opportunity um, to reorder our own being. It gives us the space to ask questions. It gives us the necessity to become stronger and to transcend fear and confusion. And, you know, for myself, you know, after years and years of illness and then COVID, which is sort of like, again, microcosm, macrocosm, right? Only it sort of happened in reverse. I had my own personal struggles with illness, and then it became like a global theme. And then it's like I'm emerging from my singular experience into the collective experience, and then hopefully we're all together moving beyond all of that, you know. It's really, really interesting to me, the way these things seem to be structured, you know, this symmetry between our internal existence and the external universe. It's really quite a remarkable thing. If you guys follow my live streams or not, you can go back and just find them, the synchronicity videos. You know, I talk a lot about how I think that synchronicities are basically just an awareness of the symmetry in the universe and how that symmetry transcends. Uh, it's not it's 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 not constrained to the external or the internal. There's a symmetry between our internal experience and the external world. Oh, so where else were we going with that? I was also thinking about how this idea of periods, the aeons, that idea of like, the the Isis, Osiris, and the crowned and conquering child Horus, or you could speak about it in other terms and call it patriarchy, matriarchy, and then this crowned and conquering child phase. Um, I think it's really interesting to look at the development of humanity as the development of an individual, the development of a single individual, you know. And I was thinking today about how the 1960s seemed like a sort of naive, um, almost like a prepubescent kind of awakening. It's sort of um, like we didn't have the tools to really navigate the new terrain in consciousness. We didn't really know exactly what we were doing with psychedelics. We didn't necessarily have the communications networks that we have available to us today. And so, just as with an individual human, there is very often this process of sort of coming to consciousness and a higher form of awareness, and then sort of slipping back into a slumber and then waking up again. There's a great masterpiece that is a lifetime's commitment if you're really going to try to study this, but Finnegan's Wake by James Joyce is kind of about this, if it's about anything at all. But I think that's kind of a good representation of what we're experiencing and observing. Is that this uh, juncture that we find ourselves at is like the mature awakening, and what happens in the individual life is that if the person falls back asleep and goes back into automata, or like my mother became a yuppie and became increasingly miserable and dull, and it sucked her in. The matrix got a hold of her, and it made her its own. And then a little bit later in life, maybe in her like mid 40s, she started to snap out of it and wake back up. But what happens when we go through that process is that there are consequences of having slumbered again, that have to be reconciled. And I think that is exactly where we're at, as a collective. Microcosm, macrocosm. These old, speaking of the Jews that were brought up in the chat, a lot of this sort of understanding that we have, that we understand now to be hermetic and that we associate with mystery schools, actually largely comes from Jewish mysticism. Um, and it's worthy of noting and consideration, that your average Orthodox Jewish person does not know anything about the deeper mystical meanings that lie behind, um, you know, even Genesis, much less the Zohar and the Kabbalah and all of this stuff. They're actually forbidden to contemplate this stuff, forbidden to discuss it. And I think it's just an interesting thing to consider, that that I think that also probably contributed to the modern form of these religions and how they're sort of disassociated from the real revelation and spiritual insight and the guidance that that can provide has clearly been lost with, you know, Christians and mainstream Orthodox Judea these days. Um, And so, what I was getting at is that, you know, in the 1960s, right, we had this wave of consciousness. We had this awakening that occurred. And by the way, just while we're on the subject, I am pretty suspicious of the way that woke has come to be associated with all these lunatic, you know, narratives and sort of weird fringe movements. That really seems like a deliberate demonization, because what this, you know, being awake used to refer to was that people had started to become aware of themselves. They had become aware of their subconscious mind and the influence that it has over their lives. They had been aware of indoctrination and propaganda and the effects that it had had on them. And they had started to become aware of maybe synchronicities and, you know, a veil that is very thin, that can easily be lifted and removed, that allows us to enter into a relationship with a greater reality, right? That's what woke, you know what I mean? That's where it was coming from, and this was not too long ago. So, you know, I really think that it's just something to be aware of, that, you know, we have to separate the wheat from the chaff and really pay attention to how the media is dealing with these sort of movements. And you know, what compelled me to mention it right now is that when I say awakened, I like have this peripheral sort of fear of people associating me with like the woke movement because I'm using this terminology, or, you know, just thinking that that's what I'm representing or something. You know, it's made it very difficult for us to just communicate fluidly, because everyone has all these ideas that are attached to all of these concepts. And, you know, I really think that, you know, social media, social engineering through social media is something we really need to watch out for and be really careful for, and to learn, you know, to be aware of the psychological techniques that are employed to sort of confuse all of this stuff. Uh, but anyways, before I went down that rabbit hole, where I was going is that, you know, we had this, I think of it as the sort of, what do you call it, before an earthquake, the tremors, right? And then you have the like main event, and it's like, and everything splits open and California falls in the ocean or whatever. But you know, the tremors were like the 1960s, and or this like juvenile awakening, right? Before we all grew up and went back to sleep through the late 70s, 80s, early 90s, and then started to snap back out of it again in the early 2000s. And so there's sort of this like really bumpy sort of order out of chaos transitional period that we're going through currently. But we're much, 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 much better suited to actually make something meaningful out of the circumstances that we find ourselves in. Because, you know, for example, the people in the 1960s that were coming into contact with psychedelics, you know, for the first time as modern matrix bound, you know, units of consciousness, they did not have the experience to draw on of their predecessors like we do. You know, we have made contact again with the old techniques of shamanism, but we also have access to all of the different schools of psychological thought and practices of yoga and various forms of mysticism. All of the information that has ever existed is more or less available to us at our fingertips. So it seems, you know, extraordinarily serendipitous to me that we find ourselves at this juncture where, without the integration of all of these new tools and the ability to fearlessly embrace a new form of consciousness, and to move forward, to walk with knowledge wisely, right? To step out of the shadows and shine the light where no one has ever been able to shine it before, and to actually behold what is there with, courage and clarity. Um, we are we find ourselves in this position where we can not proceed any further unless we are able to integrate the shadow of humanity, much less our individual shadows. Um, and it's extraordinary to me that we are outfitted with the tools. I was thinking about AI today, not just the internet, but AI. And it's the fact that, as much danger as it might represent, it also is our first opportunity to potentially interact with consciousness that is coming from a totally neutral and objective place, right? And it hasn't even been influenced by survival. Even the most objective of us human beings, right? We still have these cognitive biases that are deeply, inextricably intertwined with our survival instincts. And so all of our perceptual apparatus is sort of bound up with these fear based influences, right? So this sort of idea that we're moving into a new place, a new frontier for humanity, where consciousness is in a position to cut so many of the tethers that have it sort of rooted to the old world, so it's not just psychedelics, it's not just access to information and our ability to learn and to pursue knowledge freely, but also our ability to combine those things with an interaction with completely new form of consciousness. And earlier when I was talking about how we need to sort of separate ourselves as individuals from these larger global narratives that are so full of, potential threats and fear. Um, this is why, I really don't see much forward thinking right now. It's like people are actually scared stiff. No one really wants to say it, but that's what I'm observing. Uh, it's how it looks, and it is true that there is wisdom in dealing with our traumas and healing before we try to move into these unbounded spaces. Um, but I just think it's interesting to notice that even in the psychedelic world, unlike in the 1960s and even in the 90s, where we had people like Timothy Leary and Terence McKenna that were, looking into the stars, or, the galactic mind and the future, leaving, how Terence McKenna would talk about it as leaving the womb of the earth, or terrestrial, even leaving the body and just sort of being like free floating consciousness. You know what I mean? That kind of thinking, that really like just far out frontiers of consciousness kind of contemplation, you don't really see that so much. It's like people are sort of frozen, either barely dealing with the present or processing the past. Um, and I think that that's why we're confronting so much that is so threatening, that people are not even able to really look to the future. Um, it's sort of difficult to see what we want to see there, and this is where we have to take conscious responsibility for engineering our internal universe. Because again, it is absolutely true that just as in that first moment of creation, when the cosmic consciousness became aware, and that self-awareness is what compelled all of the chaotic energy to order and symmetry, we are constantly doing this as well. Um, and so, for this has really got me focused on organizing and coming up with a protocol and a procedure for really maximizing our potential and sort of overcoming the tribulations that we are confronting in the moment. And earlier I was talking about limitations, right? Like, we are in 3D. We are in these meat suits. We are bound to matter and the laws of creation. And no matter what New Age gurus out there tell you, you are not getting around that before you die. We are constrained by the limitations of natural law, and we need to be realistic about the role that consciousness plays and what it can and cannot do, and et cetera, et cetera. Um, and the way that we do that is by reclaiming the gifts of the mysteries. Um, and what that is a real functionable metaphysics, right? And so, for example, when let's call it the deity became conscious, as Aleister Crowley said, it made a bad bargain, right? Because now this unbound consciousness is constrained into matter. This is the Gnostic concept of the demiurgos as well, that it's sort of like a prison, that once these energy waves collapsed into an actual point and something was happening, they were bound by the influence of all of these laws, right? And so one of the forms that stricture takes is that of the chemical, right? So we need to look first, the layer beyond the energy is the chemical, right? And so, beyond psychedelics, looking at our neurobiology and our neurochemistry and developing a conscious relationship with that in combination with all of these other new tools that we have, right? We are in a position to take control of our own bioengineering, our own conscious development, our own engineering of our microcosm, and as a consequence of engineering our own internal being, we can change the world. Right? And so, excuse me, still a little bit congested from the COVID. I mean, I'm sure you guys can see where I'm going with this. Um, yeah, so that's where we need to begin with our relationship with dopamine and glutamate and serotonin, and also structuring our behaviors to support the type of consciousness we want to see in our own lives. This whole flow state thing, I'm definitely getting pulled into a description of that, which I don't really want to do because I've made live streams where I'm talking about this. The main bulletin point of all this is that we really should be excited and looking forward to the future, because we are in a position to build something that no generation in history has had the tools to create. The combination of the fact that the average layperson can have an understanding of the neurotransmitters and the enzymes and even the organisms that make up the microbiome in our gut and our brain. We can engineer every aspect of ourselves. And I think we have the knowledge to do it in a way that actually is sustainable and meaningful, and it can be taught, it can be repeated, it is testable. And so what we have, in addition to the sort of opportunities that are created by this sort of awareness and consciousness, this sort of ties into having a universal sort of metaphysics that is without dogma, and that actually bears measurable fruit in the consequence that it has on our culture and our communities and our individual being. Let me catch up in the chat a little bit here. Yeah, I mean, I'm just as guilty as anyone else. I think the last few years, I really, between all the global circumstances and the difficulties that I was dealing with in my own life with my health, and just getting over 40, I think we have all of these ideas about what that means. And this is another reason that psychedelics are so important, and uh, really having history to draw from. Um, but for example, where I realized that I was imposing ideas about what it means to be a certain age upon my own experience, even though what it means to be a certain age is not the same as it was 10 years ago. And, where we think about aging, um, having been influenced by the generations that have come before us, what generations before us thought about things is irrelevant at a quicker and exponentially quicker pace every day, because technology and consciousness are moving so rapidly that we really have to watch out for that. We really have to be aware of where perceived limitations that are imposed on us by ancestors that didn't know their asses from a hole in the ground, really. With all due respect, I mean, especially coming from the sort of modern European influenced world. These people didn't know shit about anything. You know what I mean? We we really, 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 really need to watch out for their influence on our perception and our expectations, because it's not relevant to us. And the other limitations that are almost imposing themselves on us, but we have to allow it, right? We have to allow it. By the way, the lesser banishing ritual of the pentagram, if you don't know this ritual, it is absolutely the most effective way to deal with um, the sort of influences that we've been discussing in this light stream, um, to order our universe and determine every day, what influences and forces and elements are going to be allowed to penetrate into our circle and enter our universe, and which ones are not. Um, Extremely important. But yeah, just to go with this last comment in the chat, that people are not, it seems that people are struggling to maintain positive expectations. We should not allow ourselves to be influenced, because things move so quickly and miracles can come from so many different directions, and the universe is so unpredictable, and there have been so many surprises that having expectations that impose limitations is totally unproductive. Totally unproductive. We do have some serious issues. We have environmental concerns. We have political concerns. We have the potential for World War III brewing all around the globe. But I I think some things have happened, with COVID, for example, that should give us a bit of pause. The more paranoid among us, I think it's kind of starting to look like the things people were the most afraid of in terms of like new world order control emerging from the pandemic situation are not actually going to happen. It's looking like we're not going to have cards that are vaccination cards. Well, we do have those, but um, the point is that the restrictions are being um, taken away. They're not being increased. We have Bill Gates a couple of months ago admitted that it was far less lethal than they had thought, and all of this stuff. So, you know what I mean? Whereas we had been afraid that it was going to be this absolute stranglehold that was only increasing in its pressure and the force that it's exerting, that's not what's actually happening. So, I think that flexibility in our beliefs about what's happening in the world is absolutely healthy and absolutely essential, especially when it comes to making a choice between fear and love. And one of the ways that I've dealt with it is that, I just kind of know in myself that I'm not going to tolerate uh, any undue influences on myself. And so there's really no reason to be concerned about it. And, um, we need to pick our brightest and highest conception of what is possible for us based on real knowledge of ourselves. That's important, based on real knowledge of ourselves. But to conceptualize the highest expression of who and what we are and what we can be, and to move forward in the universe, assuming the support to materialize, to realize that expression, and just not concern ourselves in a way that limits, right? Of course, it's good to be aware and to use our intelligence and wisdom to navigate the world, obviously, but we there is no reason to define what we can be and what we can do in terms of limitations. Um, we have to be very careful about that. And we also have to be very careful with fear. Fear is like a interference pattern. And what we ultimately are hoping to do is to become like hollow tubes that bring down fire from heaven, right? And in the form of creative expression and healing and, just fuel to um, I guess that's just a moth. Sorry, I'm outside in the jungle, and every now and then something starts flying around my head. I want to be aware of what exactly it is. You guys hear that sound? That's the destruction of the rainforest. I don't know if you can hear that, but they're mining 24 hours a day. The illegal mining, just gigantic trucks full of ore back and forth from down the river. I actually found the spot before they did a couple of months ago. I found a couple of little bits of wire gold and stuff. I don't know why I didn't go back and collect some of it. But the other day we looked down the river, and there's cranes right in the spot where I found these indications that there was a lot of mineral there. So that was kind of a bummer. I could have beat them to it. And by the way, you guys, since I'm distracted anyways, hit the like button. Please share, subscribe. Support us on Patreon, where you can join secret streams that are only for Illuminati patrons. We are demonetized, and we are not only demonetized, but we are deprioritized across all social media platforms. Google has admitted that that's how it works. We're going to find out more thanks to Rumble suing Google and winning. The algorithm secrets are about to be spilled, and hopefully, once that happens and it's all published and they're humiliated, they'll actually reduce the censorship a bit because it should put pressure on them to do so. Really thankful for the CEO of Rumble for having the guts to take on Google, and also to show that the system will actually work for us, even when it comes to the sort of David and Goliath scenario that a new social media platform taking on Google represents. I mean, that's really quite extraordinary, that they were able to gain any ground in a United States courtroom going against censorship in Google. So that's kind of what I mean. I think that we build these structures of expectation in our mind that we're sort of doomed because we have so many elements to confront at the current juncture, right? But if you're paying attention, the worst case scenarios with COVID don't seem to be happening. Rumble taking a chink out of the armor of Google, and that's something that has only started to develop. If you're feeling doomed and you're feeling like there is no real way forward, just pay attention, pay very close attention, and I think you'll find that that's not the case. It's not the case at all. And so what we need to do is just take responsibility for our own engineering. If we do not engineer ourselves, someone else will do it for us. And we don't want that. So being the generation or the generations, whoever's alive at this period, that has been gifted with more tools and opportunity than any other period in human history, I think that we kind of have to take our opposition in stride. The adversary, the stumbling block, ha-satan. That's, by the way, in case you're not familiar, that's what Satan means in Hebrew, is the adversary or the stumbling block. Um, it's really only there to build us up, um, or destroy you, but that's, again, your choice or your role. Um, but yeah, there's never anything meaningful produced without pressure. And the pressure comes from the majority of the mass, right? Like, you look out into the world and you see 80% non-player characters. That can be a little bit disconcerting. And you also might see the overwhelming mass of, well, they're just non-player characters in different forms. Really, there's no point in dividing them up into different categories because the effect is the same. They're like the carbon, the coal in a diamond mine, and without all of that pressure, without all of that useless carbon, just pressing on these little points where the points of convergence where the pressure is the greatest is where these diamonds form. So it's just all the more reason to be grateful that you have all this raw material surrounding you. And here's another thing to consider, right? And this is pragmatic motivation to elevate your consciousness. And this is a great argument. This is very powerful stuff, because a lot of people that are abject materialists, right? They have no need or use for spirituality. What am I to gain from opening myself up to this crap? That kind of attitude. And the reality is, if you look at entrainment, the higher cycling, the higher cycles, the faster cycles, right? The lower cycles entrain with the higher cycles. So when you see people that are able to rise above the masses and constrain them to serve their purposes, they are cycling at a higher rate. And you might say, well, a lot of people constrain masses to their purposes, but their purposes aren't necessarily good. So what's up with that? I would just, remind you that in my understanding of the universe, this sort of higher cycling and ethics are not necessarily congruent with each other. You know what I mean? That's not what this is about. This is about your focus in consciousness, your level of consciousness. Um, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to be pure and good. That's just a sort of myth that has been used to sell books to people. You know what I mean? It's unicorn farts for huffing. That's not how it is. But we can make the choice to be those people that rise above the masses, knowing about entrainment, and we are still um, just as invested in the collective well-being as we are in our own, right? When I talk about new opportunities in consciousness, this is the best example possible, you know, that whereas in the past it may be that the black hats or the left-hand path people, or however you want to think about them, that have understood all of this stuff and have used it to their own selfish benefit, now we are in a position where we can have a new breed that can use all of this knowledge, but can use it for the collective well-being instead of just their own. And the universe and our society have structured themselves so that you can actually do both. So properly understood, I think all of this stuff really is the most promising convergence of forces and circumstances that you could possibly hope for. And just knowing and understanding that, being in 3D and trapped in duality until we move on from this life, it's always going to, you're always going to have to take the good with the bad. Um, I almost don't even know what else to say about all that. Yeah, that's really what the right hand path is about and what it's been working for. A really great uh, right hand path magician. Um, if you read the first chapter of Morals and Dogma by Albert Pike, he talks about how there we are. This was in 1851, and he's saying, once we get to this certain point, the great revolution that has been prepared for the ages, the purpose and the aim of which is the amelioration of mankind from servitude and slavery and superstition and despotism and religion and all of this stuff, can truly begin to march. And basically, I'm saying that that is where we're at this moment. And it's a cliche that it's always darkest before the dawn, but it's not untrue. Something being generic doesn't make it false. In fact, there's, a reason why it's ubiquitous. Generic, because in this case at least, it's actually true. Um, Another way to think about it is that it is the chaos that precedes the emergence of a new order. And it's very easy to understand why all this stuff is necessary. Um, for example, the chaos you could think of as space, right? It's not determined. It's not symmetrical. It doesn't have order. Um, if it wasn't for those spaces between the order, there's no possibility of movement. And without movement, you can't have change. Nothing can reconfigure itself. Nothing can restructure itself. Um, and so, these periods of chaos must precede the emergence of a new order. It's all really simple, beautiful, and maybe most importantly, observable and demonstrable. That all of these natural laws um, and our experience, they're all predicated on these laws because they have to be. And if we take the time to develop a very deep and profound understanding of those laws, we can use them to propel ourselves to whatever heights we're comfortable with. And, you know, we have never had more motivation nor more tools at our disposal to achieve this conscious evolution. So now we march. That is correct. So what happens to the NPCs? You know, I don't know. I've wondered about that. Um, you know, you would hope that it's like Succession. You know, that they're just in an earlier sort of format, and that um, eventually, you know, they will have their moment. Um, when I really had the peak of my awakening, that's the way I understood it. That it was sort of my turn to grasp the reins of the energy and the consciousness in my world. If I could take the responsibility and develop the adeptship to get it done, which has been hit or miss. But you know what I'm saying, that it was sort of my turn in that regard, and that comes along for everyone at some point. Um, I also consider the possibility that it's one consciousness ultimately experiencing everything simultaneously from every single point in consciousness, and so that implies a lot of things, and one of the scariest things that it implies is that we eventually will all experience um, the totality of possible experience. Um, you know what I mean? We will all eventually live as every other person that's ever lived. Every insect, you know what I mean? Will have the experience of the totality of conscious experience. And that is really a hard pill to swallow, because it's great in a way, because it means that in some uh, alternate dimension or universe or future timeline, I will get to be Jerry Garcia or Maynard James Keenan, and but also I will be some starving African that ends up dying from Ebola. You know what I mean? Like you the mundane and the extraordinary, like all the totality of it will, every bit of the one consciousness is experiencing it all, and we are that one consciousness experiencing this illusion of having a single vantage point. It's a temporary and illusory, and so that implies that eventually we'll experience the totality of it, which is a lot of good and a lot of bad. um, and I do pretty heavily lean in that direction, that's got to be what happens. The specifics of it I'm not entirely sure about, but I do feel um, I resonate, I guess, with that idea. Um, yeah, so, and by the way, you guys, we're still having retreats here. So if you're interested in ayahuasca or San Pedro or Changa, or learning to survive in the Amazon rainforest and hiking around in the jungle and all of the other stuff that we do at the retreats, you have 2 months until we're done. We may continue somewhere else. I'm not sure, but we're definitely wrapping up at this property at the end of October. Um, so there's that. I finally got up the guts to pick up a wild tarantula the other night. You guys may have seen that. I posted a video of it. I was pretty pleased with myself. It's totally chill, they're not even spiders, actually. I looked it up, and they're not true spiders. I had that feeling, when I finally picked it up, I was like, this is an animal. This isn't a bug, you know? This thing is an animal. It's soft and furry, and it just runs around on you, and I don't know, it just didn't feel like I had a bug on me. Um, but yeah, it lives in the kitchen now and is helping us keep the cockroach population down. There's also a lot of tree frogs in the house, though, and I hate to think that it would be eating those because I like the tree frogs. Um, by the way, if you guys have any questions or anything that you would like me to address, it looks like I've been talking for about an hour and may have been a little bit unfocused, but I think I got my point across tonight. Always happy when I manage to do that. Um, you know, we we really are in a remarkable position that is unprecedented in human history, and you can expect the unexpected. You know, I can remember when I would mention ayahuasca to people and they had never heard of it. No one I ever mentioned knew what I was talking about. You know, that was probably only like 1997, 1998, 1990, 2000. You know, most people had no idea what it was. DMT was like this legendary psychedelic that no one had ever actually seen and you'd only heard of. Um, and, you know, I never would have imagined that people would be, you know, normal people would be drinking ayahuasca almost in the same way that, like, you know, people go skiing in Breckenridge, Colorado for their vacation or whatever. You know what I mean? It's almost at that level of acceptance and almost becoming mundane. Of course, you know, properly brewed ayahuasca can only be so mundane. Um, yeah, you know, I mean, that's not really the right language, but you understand what I mean. It's, you know, extraordinary developments that I would never have expected, um, are always waiting right around the corner. So um, keep your pessimism on a short leash. You probably won't need it. Oh, notable entity experiences. I mean, yeah, absolutely. And there's something else that happens with ayahuasca that it's not, or DMT. It's not necessarily entities, but there is an ability to. Oh, it's this is hard to explain. It's not an ability. There's a tendency for what should be blind material random circumstances to become part of the narrative in ways that are remarkable when you around periods of consumption. But you know, entities specifically, I've told these stories a number of times on the channel, and you know, you can find the videos. But just real briefly, you know, DMT entities have told me that a specific amount of money was about to be sent by a specific person. That was totally true uh, once, and that my partner would have my children before we were even romantically involved. Uh, Tons of stuff like that. I mean, I had an encounter with my mother on multiple experiences after her suicide in ceremony. In one case, she basically took on, became a DMT entity. I don't know if it was legitimately her spirit or if it was just the universal mind sort of showing me something. Which, by the way, the lesson was that you shouldn't kill yourself, not because God will judge you and punish you, but because you're stuck in whatever energetic state you're in when you cross over. And on the plane of pure consciousness, it's actually more difficult to get a hold of yourself again than it is to just do it when you're alive. So that that's an important thing, I think, to consider in case you're thinking about killing yourself. It seems that it's not a good idea. Um, but yeah, I've had a number of experiences with entities that are, I mean, they're always sort of meaningful, just because you're confronted with these beings that are just so goddamn weird, and they seem real. You know, I mean, they're as real as anything else I can perceive, and they oftentimes have access to information that they couldn't possibly. No one should have access to that information. Um, so, you know, and when I was talking earlier about how we're living amongst circumstances that are truly unbelievable, that's one of the things that I was, you know, considering, is that we have serious scientists and researchers legitimately considering that these DMT entities could be real beings. That is the most science fiction come to life sort of circumstance that I can imagine, and it's actually happening. One of the most remarkable stories I think I've heard about these entities isn't necessarily my own experience, but Shane Mouse, the comedian, had this purple girlfriend that said, you know, if you're real, prove it to me somehow, or words to that effect. And so his friend came over and tried DMT for the first time, and he said the guy closed his eyes, and after it took effect, he said, Shane, there's this purple girl in here with me that wants me to say hello to you. You know, those kind of experiences are not really that uncommon either. I mean, I actually watched my partner reach out to embrace a spirit being that I saw the spirit, you know, reach to embrace her, and she set up and reached back. You know, the spirit being reached for her first, and she set up and went to embrace the spirit being back. You know, I watched that happen, and I'm not. They're involved. You know, it should be my hallucination. These beings were dancing around. There was like 12 of them. You know, and one was female and reaches for my partner, and to my amazement, she sits up and reaches back for this being. Um, I saw a video. He may come on the channel, or I may go on his, or both. I don't know. The Adeptus Psychonautica guy. Uh, he was explaining the DMT realm as a sort of point of convergence for all of the consciousness in the universe. Like, there needed to be a place where all of these different forms of consciousness could come and meet. Um, and so, you know, as much as the information that I've gotten from these beings has been reliable, and none of it has ever been harmful, I think it's also important to remember that it's very likely just a mind, right? It's just consciousness. So just as you can have thoughts that are just thoughts, I think anything that you hear from any of these beings should be regarded the same way. You know, this is a huge mistake that people make when they get involved with new age spirituality, or, you know, smoking DMT and encountering these beings. People go crazy because the, you know, voice in their head told me to murder my family or whatever. You know what I mean? They'll do something crazy, and this voice, and it's like, people think that because it's a spirit, that it's like it has jurisdiction over you or something. You know, I think it's really important to not think about this way, to regard yourself as having the same sovereignty of will as the most high God, right? That your will is co-equal with the absolute highest will. There is no spiritual hierarchy. You know, when we talk about how every individual unit of consciousness is a splinter of this creator being consciousness, right? It's this. It's like you are this little chunk of my thumb here, and then, you know, I'm this little chunk here, but the whole thing is just thumb, right? So the thumb is God, and so this piece or this piece or this piece or this piece, it's all just thumb. So giving any part of it, you know, absolute authority is a mistake. There is no God that is above you. You, you know, so any voice that you encounter, any spirit that you encounter, its judgment, its knowledge, nothing about it should be put on a pedestal above your own um, good sense and ethics. And you know what I mean? Don't do that. Don't give authority to spirits. You have authority over spirits if they exist, and over demons, right? You are oscillating at a higher speed, and so you constrain these manifestations of consciousness to your will, not the other way around, you know? Which isn't to say that you shouldn't listen and take the information they give you into consideration. Obviously, you know, I could have benefited myself from doing that to a much greater extent. So it's getting late, and I'm gonna pop off. But thank you guys so much for spending this time with me. Please hit the like button, share, subscribe, support us on Patreon or any of the options in the chat or the description. PayPal, Zelle, cryptocurrency. Really do appreciate it. I apologize to some of you guys have asked about the mystery school reaction for Bill Cooper, and I said I was going to do it last week, but I had COVID, so I'll try to get it done tomorrow, maybe, or yeah, sometime in the next couple days we'll get that out there. Also, I finally got the sound issues worked out. I know I've been saying that forever, but I really do this time, except the microphone still makes my voice a little lower than it's supposed to be. I don't know if I can fix that, but I no longer have distortion and the bass overwhelming the microphone and all of that nonsense. So, gonna start doing more music live streams because they're actually gonna sound worthy. Um, and yeah, so thank you guys, and we'll see you again very soon.